Okay, we're rolling. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us, go from there, and your involvement with jazz and the Jazz Alliance.
Okay, well, my name is Fito Kahn. I started the Austin Jazz Alliance, I want to say back in, 2010 maybe. I don't remember exactly when I started the Jazz Alliance, but the reason that I got involved was that a friend of mine who was a jazz trumpet player who I met was trying to get some gigs and was having a hard time because he didn't really know how to get gigs. He was a musician. So I said, well, let me help you. And, we became friends. He asked me to play on his CD. He was making a CD, and I played percussion and drums. So I started realizing that there was a need in the community to help the jazz musicians find gigs. There was all of these splintered jazz groups in Austin. There was the Austin Jazz Society, the traditional jazz group. There was all of these different groups, but there wasn't an umbrella organization. Mm-hmm. And they were all kind of doing their own thing. So the Jazz Alliance started as an umbrella organization to help all of these organizations promote themselves, get gigs, sell their CDs, and hopefully, make some money. And so that's how this whole Austin Jazz Alliance started.
Where did you get involved in? What was it about jazz in particular that got you involved? And are you a musician yourself?
Yeah, so my involvement with jazz actually starts when I was a little boy. My mother played all kinds of music when I was growing up, and she grew up during the big band era, and so I had this big band influence. So Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, all of these big bands, and so I heard that growing up. But I also heard rock and roll, and I also heard music like Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, which I loved. And that Herb Alpert kind of got me involved in learning how to play the drums. I became a drummer because of Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. But I loved the music and the trumpet.
I remember them.
Yeah. So when I played in rock and roll bands in the 70s. I was a rock and roll drummer. When I moved to Austin, my friend Dwayne, who was a jazz musician, was playing some of his music. And I said, Dwayne, this really has a Latin feel to it. You should really add some percussion to it. And he said, well, do you want to play percussion? I said, absolutely, I'd love to. Mm-hmm. At the time, I had been playing in a band. It was kind of a Santana Latin rock band. So that's how I got involved with jazz, was through him. I started playing Latin jazz, which is basically what his music was.
So as far as Austin is concerned, there's a couple directions I can go with this. What challenges do jazz musicians have in Austin that might be different than other musicians have in Austin?
Yeah, one of the biggest problems or challenges that jazz musicians have is that it's a very small niche. There aren't a lot of places, number one, to play jazz. There aren't a lot of people who love jazz. It's a really small niche when you compare it to country music or to rock music or to rap music. And so because of that, there aren't very many venues that want to have jazz music because you're not going to be able to draw the people in. And these venues are all about making money of the food and the drinks.
The bigger the crowd, the better.
Right. And if you're going to bring in 10 people that want to listen to jazz, as opposed to, a bunch that want to come and drink beer and play and dance, honky tonk, not going to happen. So the challenge in Austin, because it's a smaller city, the challenge is to try to develop that community and have some venues that are willing to help build that community and help these musicians build their following, and build it up so that it's a win-win for both the musicians and for the venues.
Speaking of community, since this is intercultural stuff, what is there? Can you think of anything that differentiates the jazz culture, both the musicians and the person that listens to it, as opposed to any other music, in particular rock and roll? Is there anything that differentiates?
I think that jazz music is a little more complicated in a way. Rock and roll is real easy to listen to, and it's really four beats, and you can tap your toe to it, and the three chords on the guitar or whatever. Jazz can be very complex, and it can also be very subtle, very smooth, but there's a lot of nuances to jazz. And the thing that's kind of unique about jazz is that there's a lot of improv, there's a lot of improvisation, and everybody takes a solo, and everybody's so it's sometimes, I think, you have to develop a taste for it. You have to really kind of,
it's an acquired taste.
It's an acquired taste. You have to develop your ear for it, and I think that sometimes that comes with age, and I think it comes with, a lot of times people eventually go, oh, well, I remember that, and they start listening to it more, and it becomes more of an acquired taste.
Do you feel the demographic is older on average than like for rock and roll or what have you, or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board. I think that more and more schools now are starting to teach jazz, and I think that that's part of the influence is that if you don't listen to jazz, you don't really acquire a taste for it till you're older, and you kind of get exposed to it.
Is there would you say that there's a definably different type of well, first of all, a different musician that there's maybe this is true with all genres, I don't know, but that there's that you have to have a mindset that's somehow different for jazz than like you said, those four beats or whatever. Do you have to be calmer? Do you have to be smarter? Do you have to be any other word you can think of?
I creative, but I think in all genres you have to be creative. But with jazz, I think that I don't know how to explain the type of musician, because really I don't really think there's a type of musician. I think that it's there's all types.
Yeah, and that could be the answer is that there's no way to differentiate.
There's no way to differentiate. It's just that the genre that they like, and they can be self-taught. I mean, there's a lot of jazz musicians who don't read music.
Yeah,
right. They play by ear. They're also taught. But then you've got the professional ones that they pull out the charts, and you can tell the jazz musicians that she's going to be talking a lot.
I wish I'd brought the
mic.
Yeah, the mic. I was gonna, and I didn't. Anyway.
The thing that is kind of that's kind of cool about jazz musicians is and I think this is true of most genres, but they've got these things called real books, and they'll pull out the real book, which is basically the song with just a couple of chords, and they can tell all the musicians in the group, okay, we're going to play this particular song in the key of A, and they'll open up their book, and it's just got the pattern, and they all go to town and they all play it, and you can tell a really good musician from the ones that they know the songs, they can play it, they can improvise without having to necessarily be able to read all the notes.
Do you think that it's that the jazz musician is better at that than the average musician, or is it once again it's the same thing? You've either got good musicians, bad musicians, smart ones, or
no? I think it's across the board, because I've played in bands where guys will get together, never played with each other, but
and
they all know the
off.
song. They can take off. They say, okay, we're going to play Proud Mary in the key of A. Okay, everybody, 1, 2, 3, hit it, and they play it. They've never played together. They know the music. They know the music. They know the song. But they're you can tell.
What about the aficionado? The public that goes there. Have you identified any difference between them and the rock and roll or folk or whatever?
Yeah,
what
I
kind
think
of
so.
person gravitates towards
I think that the jazz musicians, the audience that goes to a lot of these jazz events go specifically to listen to the musicians, and they want to watch the musicians, and they want to be part of the experience. Whereas a lot of times you'll go to other clubs, and it's they go to dance. They'll go to a rock and roll place and they want to go dance, or they'll go to a venue, and they're going to watch the show. I think what's different about watching jazz musicians is you actually, at least in my mind, you get to appreciate how they can improvise because they'll play a solo one night, the next night they'll play a totally different solo, the next night they'll play totally, and they're always playing different solos, but all together. It's really neat to kind of watch them all play together. You know.
What about terminology? Is there a specific language to jazz? I mean, there's musicians I know deal with things that are a little obviously have to refer to specific things
Right.
As musicians. But as far as jazz musicians or jazz aficionados, what terminology would they use that maybe the average person wouldn't immediately recognize?
Yeah, there is a jazz terminology. I think that. I don't know all of the jazz terms because I'm not, since I don't come from the jazz world, and I didn't grow up, playing jazz. I'm not probably the best person to ask about jazz terms because there are a lot of jazz terms that I hear. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I come from the rock and roll world, and so there's a lot more terms. But I think there's a lot of just typical jazz terms that are music terms. So but I don't have any specific jazz terms I can think of off the top of my head.
So I guess we can just pretty much wrap it up. I think the only thing I can think of, what clubs did you recommend that I go to? I saw them there, but Sammy's.
The club. Oh, there's a couple of things I do want to talk about that you asked that I do want to mention. So there are some clubs. There are some clubs in town. There's some small clubs in town. Most of the clubs in town are dinner clubs. So you'll go and you'll eat, and they'll have background music, and so it's not really the best experience because you hear people talking, right? And it's kind of annoying for jazz musicians to be playing while you have people talking in the background. They would rather you listen to the music, and then it's a lot better experience, and they know that you're listening, and they feed off of that. So there's a couple of clubs in town, but most of them are not what I would consider a true jazz club where you go and you sit and have a drink and you listen to jazz. There used to be a place called the Elephant Room.
I remember that.
A very popular place here in town for many, many, many years. That was the go-to place.
That was on Congress, wasn't it?
It was on Congress.
Riverside?
On Riverside. The interesting thing about the Elephant Room was that there was a person that would book the bands that played at the Elephant Room. And so this person had a lot of power. Because in a small city like Austin, there aren't a lot of places to play. And so there was only so many slots on so many days. And so you had to kind of be...
and that guy's good side?
On that guy's good side. And it was kind of interesting because this guy had certain opinions about different musicians and their quality of musicianship. And so a lot of times he'd let you audition. So you'd play maybe a 5 o'clock, on a Wednesday night when there was nobody there, and you'd play there. And if he liked you, he'd maybe move you someplace but better. He did not like female singers.
Really?
He felt that female singers weren't really jazz musicians. So if you were a female jazz singer...
So did he feel that way about Ella Fitzgerald?
Well, I never asked him that, but that would have been a good question to ask. But he certainly didn't like the fact that if you... And so there was an interesting dynamic there. There was bands that could play there, no problem. There's some bands that could never get a gig there. They've tried and tried and tried.
Wow.
He was very difficult to get a hold of. And
so it's not so much like that anymore?
Well,
first of all, the room's gone, right?
The room's gone. And so now, it's a little bit easier. It's still hard because there aren't very many venues. And so you have to have somebody promoting you or an agent or a manager that's going to go and try to get you the gig, right? But that's certainly an issue here in Austin because there aren't very many venues. In a big city, if you go to New York or Chicago or New Orleans, a lot more venues, and you can find more places to play. So it's difficult in Austin. The jazz scene in Austin is very, very difficult, very hard to do. So a lot of people end up leaving, or moving, or changing genres and playing, becoming a wedding band or
Yeah.
some other genre where there's
Yeah, if they got to pay the bills.
wedding
then
bands pay the bills.
All right. Well, can you think of anything I haven't thought of that you wanted to talk about as far as, or otherwise wrap it up as far as jazz is concerned in Austin? Anything else we didn't cover?
No, I don't.
I think we got everything.
I'm sure there's probably stuff that we can think about later, but no, I mean, I think we covered. We covered pretty
Great.
much.
All right, Fito. Thanks a lot, man.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it.
Yep.